Shalom, we are here in Be'er Sheva at the Yitran Communications Powerline Chip Company, and I'm happy to introduce Mr. Avner Matmor, co-founder and CEO of Yitran, and Mr. Tom Tamarkin, CEO of USCL in California. Mr. Tamarkin is responsible for smart meter business development utility industry and for changing the laws in the United States, which now requires all utility companies to install smart meters with Zigbee.
Thank you for inviting us this afternoon. This is probably the third time that I've been to your company. I believe the first was 2004. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, you're welcome.
I would like to make note of your business card and the back of your business card, which basically says in English, powering the smart home. So we know we're in the right place. I'm going to present a brief presentation. It's a presentation that I've used in America time and time again at conferences. You may have in fact seen this presentation if you and I were at the same conference. If so, I'll stop. But I'm going to go through it very quickly. I'm also going to give a very quick summary of why we are here today and the state of the American, what we call smart grid and smart meter deployment. In 2001, our country, and certainly California, suffered what we call an energy crisis, which resulted in blackouts and brownouts and a general awareness of the utility industry that they had what we call a peak demand problem. When generation capacity was offline due to maintenance, as an example, and too many consumers turned on too many electric appliances at one time, it resulted in blackouts. Over the course of about 4 years, our company and myself was responsible for lobbying, if you will, the California Energy Commission and the California Public Utilities Commission, and we got the support of a senator in California, Senator Tom Tamarkin, who wrote a law signed by the governor which caused the two agencies, the California Energy Commission and the Public Utility Commission, to come together and do what became a 2-year, and it was called a pricing study. And it was referred to as the SPI, and the purpose of this study was to demonstrate to utility companies and the commissions whether or not, if you gave consumers tools to save money, to use less energy, if they would respond in a positive way. And the answer, of course, is yes. It took millions of dollars of consultant fees to prove the obvious, but this is how our industry works. 2 years after that policy began, the Public Utility Commission mandated the 3 major utilities in California replace all of their old electromechanical power meters with modern digital, solid-state digital meters. The next step that we took was to file some significant testimony with the California Public Utility Commission, laying out a series of specifications and a series of functions that we thought was very important to the benefit of the consumers, because what has happened in the power industry for the last 100 years, frankly, nobody addressed the needs of the consumer, only the needs of the utility company and the employees of the utility company. And in this testimony, we laid out the concept of what would become a home energy management system inside the house. And we laid out the concept of providing information to the consumer in real time, as opposed to what the regulators now call stale information off an internet site, which is 2 or 3 days old in many cases. And we pointed out the fact that it's the consumer, the taxpayer, who who's actually financing the purchase of these new meters. Obviously, a large company like Southern California Edison, if they have to replace, which they have, 5 million meters, somebody has to pay the bill. How does that happen? They get authorization for a rate base increase, and they amortize the cost of those meters across everybody's electric bill and recover that cost in, say, 5 years. We pointed out the fact that the key in the utility industry is the consumer. And one of our slogans for many years, my pet slogan, was the fact that our mission as a company is to change ratepayers into customers, convert ratepayers into customers. What's a ratepayer? For 100 years historically, the public utility commissions in all 50 states refer to people who buy utility commodities, meaning gas, electricity, water, and even telephone. They refer to them as ratepayers because they pay a rate. They get the bill at the end of the month, and whatever the bill says, they pay it. They're not customers, they're ratepayers. In order to convert ratepayers to customers, we have to actually provide information to the customer real time. The analogy is going to the petrol station, filling up your car with fuel, and you know how many liters, or in our country, gallons, you've purchased, and you know the price in shekels or dollars per liter or per gallon, and you can make a decision very quickly. I only have 300 shekels as I did this morning, so I stopped. That's the analogy. In 2006, 2007, our company was successful getting Southern California Edison to adopt a specification which we wrote for meters, and that resulted in Southern California Edison releasing bid documents, which were then given to people like our company and other much larger meter companies like Landis & Gyr, Elster, Itron, as an example, General Electric. And this actually forced the meter companies to kind of raise or elevate the features and functions of the basic meter so that the meter could serve as a communication gateway and provide this information to the customers and to the utility. And once this happened, there was no turning back. We, in fact, raised the bar, so to speak. And if you think you were angry at me this morning when I blocked your car from going through the gates, I had the CEOs of the major meter manufacturers, in fact, upset with us because we made their life, we gave them a big headache. We made life much more difficult because they had to go back and spend tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars redesigning the basic meter. Having said that, our company was successful, and I'm very proud of this document. I'll show it. I picked this up in Jerusalem Sunday, and it's our first Israeli patent. We're very pleased that we got the patent issued in Israel, and I'm very pleased that I picked it up in Jerusalem on the first day of Hanukkah, because the patent is for a system concept, as I explained last week, for conservation. 1 day of oil becomes 8 days, in other words. Okay. We also have 2 granted patents in the United States, granted patent in the country of China, and a granted patent in the EU, and another granted, or excuse me, a pending patent in the EU. And the reason, of course, that we filed for patent protection is that the utility companies and the utility industry in general is a very large industry. It's a $1.5 trillion industry per year in the United States, and it moves with the speed of a glacier. Some people would say the glacier is going uphill. We started this project in 2001, and here it is 11 years later. And finally, we're starting to see some commercial transactions. We're starting to see money change. Now I'll go through, as I said, this presentation rather quickly. The problem, everybody knew about it in our country. California became the laughingstock of the nation because we were the high-tech capital. Silicon Valley. blackouts. I've already described, I'm going to give you a copy of this presentation on USB, so I'm not going to read it verbatim. But this covers many of the things that I spoke about a minute ago. California Public Utility Commission began to mandate that the state 3 investor-owned utilities, San Diego, Los Angeles, and San Francisco, replace over 12 million meters. Southern California Edison, at the beginning of this process, said, no, we're not going to do it. And we were successful at changing their attitude. And they did decide to do it. And here's a great picture. On the upper right side of the screen, we see what we call an old-fashioned electromechanical meter in a box. And I'll explain the significance of the box in America in a minute. And you see the rust on the box because this is in California near a coast with seawater. And on the lower left-hand side of the screen, we see, as I said, a modern digital communicating meter. In this instance, the meter is manufactured by a company called Itron.
Move it a little bit. Save one.
And most people in our country have heard the term smart meter. They don't necessarily know what it is. But technical people like me and others look at this and say, are these meters really smart? Well, they say they're smart, but are they? Probably not so smart. In this instance, we're looking at a series of gas meters that are probably 50 years old, and PG&E simply screwed a transmitter on top of the meter and connected an interface to it so that it could take the data from the meter and transmit it over radio waves to a guy in a van driving by. Hardly smart, but it does automate the process of meter reading. We call that AMR, or automatic meter reading. However, we can in fact make these meters smart. Here's how we do it. I'm going to skip that because that's only relevant if you're in the industry. I mentioned Pacific Gas and Electric, what we call PG&E, whose headquarters is in San Francisco. PG&E has recently replaced 5 million power meters, electric power meters. They've also added this screw on the top module, if you will, to about 4 million gas meters. So collectively, there are 9 million transmitters now that are operating. And PG&E sent a brochure to every one of their customers. Millions and millions of these things went in the mail. And the brochure basically explains what is the smart meter. Well, the smart meter is a not-so-smart meter with a couple of radio transmitters and radio receivers inside it that can communicate with the meter itself so that the data inside the meter can be sent back to the utility company, can be sent to the consumer and devices inside the house, and further, these two radios can be coupled so that we transmit information to and from the home to the utility for billing applications and even control applications. Is that smart? Well, it certainly automates the process, but it's not smart until we put software in the meter that makes the meter have a intelligence based on the ability to execute control signals as a function of what's going on inside the house and what's going on in the overall utility network, transmission distribution network. And again, this is primarily focused on what we call demand response. And in this case, important point, I highlighted the point, but what PG&E points out is that in time, not today, but in time, maybe a year, maybe 3 years, the consumer is going to be able to purchase and use a home energy management system together with automated appliances and electronics to optimize the value of your energy use. Now, what does that mean? We have 2 radio transmitter and receivers or transceivers in the meter, but today only one of them is working. The transmitter and the receiver between the meter and the utility company is active in all cases and allows them to replace meter readers and to replace vans driving by because they're in what we call a fixed network configuration. But the radio transceiver inside the meter that communicates with devices inside the home is remotely activated by the utility. And the software that makes it work is also downloaded. We call it delivery of software on the fly, so to speak, over the air. That hasn't been done yet. So we have tens of millions, I believe 27 million meters have been installed that have both transmitters and receivers inside the meter. But again, the transmitter and receiver that communicates to things inside the house is not yet active. Why? There's some technical issues, and that's why I'm here today in Beersheba. But backing up for a second, here is a block diagram, and what we see is a meter, and the meter communicates back to the utility, presumably over a wide area network, oftentimes what we call IP protocols and use of the internet. And the meter also communicates with things inside the home, like a handheld device that provides this information directly to the consumer. It can also provide information to a computer, to a PDA, doesn't matter. Display device is a display device. We can also integrate in the system gas meters, water meters, pool pumps, refrigerators, and appliances that use large amounts of electricity. And in fact, this is the block diagram, which is at the core of the patents that I showed you a few minutes ago. So what we have IP coverage on is not a specific piece of hardware, such as a display device, but rather the interconnection of all of these elements, meaning the wide area network, the local area network, and the metrology, or the meters that provide the data to these two networks. The smart meter, because it's ultimately paid for by the consumer, converting again ratepayers into smart customers. And a truly smart meter supports what we call a plug-and-play electricity dashboard. If you think about it in your car, and if you look at this very closely, you see my car is about 25 years old, but this is my car, and there is an economy meter, which I flagged with the red arrow, and as you press the accelerator pedal, you watch the needle move. If this were a new car, it would be a digital device on the dashboard. But the point is, this helps the operator of the car optimize speed versus acceleration versus how fast do I want to get there. The same is true with the house, the concept of having an energy dashboard inside the home. And coupled with, and in fact this meter was manufactured by a company in Yochneam, Arad, sold in the United States. And as I said a few minutes ago, I used the analogy of the gas station, or petrol station as you would call it here. And once you have this data inside the home, you can do anything you want with it. It's only software. So let's explore this a little bit further. Look under the cover of the meter, so to speak, and we say, what is a meter? A meter is nothing more than a voltmeter and a amp meter, meaning current, and a calculator, and a clock. That's the basic core, the basic four elements of the meter. But if it's a solid state meter, we're going to add technical things. I don't want to get too complicated here, but as a calculator or a computer has what we call memory locations, the same is true of the meter. So the meter has this voltmeter, and it's putting volts every 100th of a second in a specific memory location, the same with amperes, the same with other values.
Wattage.
And of course, for those of us in the industry, we can get very elegant and we can talk about something called VARs, which is volt amperes reactive, and has to do with the phase relationship of AC power. And the reason this is important is that for those people that have a science interest, we know that 1 horsepower is 744 watts, 100% efficiency. And if I have a 1 horsepower motor in the home, depending upon the quality of the power, that motor may in fact take 800 watts or 900 watts or 950 watts. If it's taking obviously a larger number of watts, you're effectively paying more for the power to get the same amount of work. So this gets to issues that we call quality of service, and these are factors that can be inserted, if you will, into new tariff structures. So all electrons are not created equally, so to speak. You can buy the high-test A grade of power or the lower B grade of power. These are the kinds of things that we're now talking about in the regulatory commissions in the United States. And a lot of this I'm not going to go through because you've been in this industry for 16 years and you know it's probably more than I do. But one of the things that fits into our business model is the concept of what I call subscriber side billing. Because if we have this information in the meter and we're doing mathematical calculations in the meter and in the home, we now can produce the bill locally as accurately, if not more accurately, than producing the bill at a remote utility company. This has a tremendous implication on the overall network because I now reduce the amount of data I have to send from each individual home, small business, back to the utility by orders of magnitude, a factor of 100. And we no longer have to put an envelope in the mail every month with a stamp on it, which is a tremendous cost savings to utilities because every utility company in the United States currently bills once a month, and the collection cost is about $2 per month, meaning the cost of the stamp, the cost of the labor, the cost of the postage, and the cost of overhead. So by using this concept of subscriber side billing and having a display device inside the home, be it a PC or be it a dedicated device like this one, which is a device manufactured in the United States by a company called Trendle, I no longer have to worry about sending the bill every month. I can elect as the consumer to pay every week or even every 2 or 3 days. Depending how disciplined I am with money, I may in fact want to pay every 3 or 4 days as opposed to waiting to the end of the month. I simply have to press a button and the funds are transferred electronically from my credit card or from a bank debit card. I talked a few minutes ago about new tariff, class of service. These things are getting more and more complicated. And also the concept of remote connect, disconnect. Because today, most of these meters, probably 95% of them in the United States, are now being ordered with a 200 ampere relay or contactor inside the meter, which means the utility company can turn the service on and off remotely. Why would they want to do that? 2 reasons. One has to do with problem accounts where the bills simply aren't being paid. And they give a tremendous incentive to the consumer by threatening to turn you off or limiting the amount of power that you can get. They might always allow you to take 10 amperes, but you'll never be able to take any more power than that. And that way your refrigerator stays on, your life support equipment stays on. But the minute you turn your electric stove on, power goes off and you have to reset it. And that's an important issue to us because in our claims, which we talked about in Jerusalem a couple of days ago with the patent attorney, are based around this concept of remote connect, disconnect. We have granted claims. And a minute ago, I mentioned the fact that what we call Zigbee, which we'll talk about here in a minute, the Zigbee transceiver, which is a transmitter and a receiver in one integrated circuit. I talked about the concept of remote activation and even putting software, application software, in that chip remotely. These new meters, in fact, allow the entire operating system, or what we call the real-time run system of the meter, to be downloaded. So I may buy a meter today, and it's only a kWh, kilowatt hour meter, and it may not do time of use. It may not do peak demand, or what we call peak demand. And the utility company can decide, well, a year from now or 2 years from now, I want that particular meter at a particular address to have more features and functions so that it can support time of use, it can support subscriber-side billing, it can support class of service. They can actually load a new application, or you think of it as an application, but it's an operating system, or what we call a real-time run system, into the meter and upgrade the functionality of the meter. That was one of the things that we urged early on in our testimony. The reason for that is that if you have an installed base of hundreds of thousands or millions of meters, you don't want them to become obsolete in a short period of time. You want the ability to successively increase their functionality and their features. Here's an example of our software running in Palm Pilot. Customer benefits, I think we've already covered. But in this case, we're talking about the integration with a HAN, H-A-N. That's the local area network. We think in the computer business, we call it a LAN, but the utility industry has chosen to call it a HAN, H-A-N, meaning home area network. And because most of these meters have the what I refer to as reactive power capability, they not only look at voltage and amperes, but they're looking at the relationship, the phase relationship between current and voltage. In the home, we can do what we call signature analysis, and we know the health, if you will, of appliances. What do I mean by that? As an air conditioning motor ages and its bearings wear, the consumer can be alerted before the motor burns out and he has to call somebody in a panic. And in fact, this can be so sensitive that we can even provide signals to the consumer telling he or she that it's time to replace a dirty filter. And I have video posted to our website of all of this. So again, we talk about getting customer data real time, meaning I'm updating the display in the home, say every second or every 2 seconds. And we can actually download information from the utility company. We can even download media content or education or energy videos, as we discussed with Dr. Schroeder and Dr. Eliezer yesterday. The limitation is only the bandwidth of the entire network. My picture with the Prime Minister of Israel, I actually discussed this 4 years ago with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and he got it. He understood fully because of the nature of the Israeli generation system here. You basically have, that I know of, 3 coal plants, one at Hadara, one at Ashdod, one in Tel Aviv. There may be one at Elad, I'm not sure. But that's basically it. And Israel has this demand response problem as well. And it took the Prime Minister about 20 seconds to look at me and see, yeah, I get it, I understand. Good idea. And there was a time where Israel was considering, and may still be, there have been some technical challenges, urging consumers to replace petrol or gasoline cars with entirely electric cars with batteries that can be very quickly offloaded and uploaded at a charging station every couple of 100 kilometers. In order to do that, you have to have more generation capacity, and you have to balance the load. You don't want to be charging your vehicle at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the air conditioner comes on and pool pump comes on, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to have enough intelligence in this meter and in this system that those decisions can be made to give the consumer the best overall lowest cost at the end of the month. And if you do this, you build the customer into the smart grid and the smart meter system, and it creates a win-win situation for everybody, the utility, certainly the consumers, and certainly the power generators. So that, in a nutshell, 50,000-foot level, is what's now going on in the United States, and we call it the smart meter and the smart grid. Smart grid refers to all of the wires that are necessary to get the power from the generating station to a person's house. And there's a tremendous amount of technical switches and transformers and capacitors and a lot of moving parts, so to speak, in that network. All of this is under computer control for optimization, which is important in blackout situations, et cetera. And the smart meter is the final delivery point in every home in America. Every small business in America has a meter like this. There are 135 million of these meters. Department of Energy came out in 2002 under the Bush administration with a document called the Vision 2030 plan to replace all of those meters within 10 years. Because of politics in the United States, it took another administration to actually get that moving. That has happened. And when I was here last week, I shared with you a video of our President Obama explaining to the American people just what a smart meter is, probably in much simpler terms than I just did. But nonetheless, we have a 1-minute video coming from the White House, excerpted from a speech from the President of the United States explaining how important this technology is to Americans and to the industry.
Build new transmission lines on federal lands. But most of the projects that are receiving grants involve the installation of what are known as smart meters, devices that will have a direct benefit for consumers who want to save money on their electric bills. Now let me explain what's going on with these smart meters. Smart meters will allow you to actually monitor how much energy your family is using by the month, by the week, by the day, or even by the hour. So coupled with other technologies, this is going to help you manage your electricity use and your budget at the same time, allowing you to conserve electricity during times when prices are highest, like hot summer days. And all this information will help increase renewable energy generation, provide support for plug-in electric vehicles, and reduce the carbon pollution that causes climate change.